Hello, my name is Mike Molina, and I'm a loan officer with Intercap Lending. I've been in the industry about 30 years, and during that time, I've seen a lot of cycles of the economy. Right now, I see a lot of information going on out there that's giving a lot of anxiety and even fear to people regarding where we're at and where we're headed, especially in regards to the housing market. So I want to take just a few minutes to go over some of these things, dispel some rumors and myths, and address some concerns, and also give a little insight into where we might be headed. So in this video, I'm going to cover the following topics. First, inflation, the Federal Reserve, how they're handling it, what raising rates really means, and so forth. We're also going to cover recessions and their impact, what determines a recession, and are we actually in a recession? Next, we're going to be covering, will there be a housing crash? Are we in a bubble? And compare the Great Recession and housing crash of 2008 to current day. Where are home values headed? And the difference between the deceleration of appreciation and actual depreciation. We're going to cover interest rates. Will they be coming down? When they will be coming down? And finally, as all this comes together, is now a good or a bad time to buy? So with that said, let's jump right into it. So the first thing that I want to say is that the future of interest rates is determined by what happens with inflation. And that has always been the case. A lot of people are hearing right now about how the Fed is raising rates, the Fed is raising rates. And people are conflating that with the Fed raising mortgage rates. The Fed is not raising mortgage rates. The Fed is raising what's called the Fed funds rate, which is the rate that the Federal Reserve lends money to banks for various types of lending. As the Fed raises that rate, that is being done to combat inflation. So ironically, when the Fed made a big surprising jump in June by raising the Fed funds rate 0.75% instead of 0.5% as expected, the initial reaction was like, oh my gosh, it's really going to go up high. But then we started to see a steady decline in mortgage rates. And the reason is, pardon me, is because the bond market, which is where mortgage money comes from, perceived that as the Fed was aggressively combating inflation. So that was perceived positively by the mortgage bond market, and thus interest rates started to trickle down. And they continued to trickle down until we hit about August. So what you're seeing here is a chart that says, when will inflation peak? Now, what you're going to see on this chart is this is a historical view of inflation starting back in June of 2021, going all the way through the latest reading of August of 22. So if you look at June of 2021, you'll see that inflation was at 0.8%. Then all the way over to June of 2022, and you'll see that inflation went down to 0.7%. This was a positive reading on inflation. And as a result, we started to see mortgage rates drop. Also, if you look at July of 2021, you see that inflation was 0.3%. July of 2022, flat reading. So rates continue to be moderate and maybe slightly dropping. And then August happened, okay? August last year, inflation was at 0.2%. Then August this year, inflation jumped to 0.6%. And that is when everything started to go horribly wrong. And so the Federal Reserve is going to continue to raise the Fed funds rate to help cool down the economy so that inflation gets under control. Now, you see that September of last year, inflation was at 0.3%. We don't have a reading on September of this year yet, obviously. That could go either way. But if it's flat or higher, rates will probably stay where they are, even go up. If it's an improvement, which highly unlikely that it will be, then rates could go down. More than likely, what we're going to see is come October, November, December, and even January, where inflation was higher last year. Hopefully, all the activities of the Federal Reserve this year will lead to inflation coming down. So if we start to see an improvement year over year from October last year to October this year, November last year to November this year, and so on and so forth, then we will see interest rates start to come down. And that is what the goal of the Federal Reserve has been. That is why they are raising interest rates. They're not raising mortgage rates. They're raising the Fed funds rate. And the irony is that by raising the Fed funds rate, it's actually going to help drive mortgage rates down. So you might ask, well, how do I know that? I mean, how can I be sure that that's true? Well, history is the greatest predictor of the future. So let me show you right now what's going on. This next slide shows gross domestic product as a predictor of recessions. So we know that right now, despite what government people want to say we are in a recession. Traditionally, a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters where the GDP goes down. So, and if you look at this chart right here, these are 3 different measurements of gross domestic product, and every one of them you will see. You can go to this website yourself, by the way, and look all this up. These gray shadowed columns or lines are recessions. So starting in 1970, there was a recession, 70, 74, 75, 1980, 83, I believe it was, then 1992, 2002, 2008, and then of course 2020. So each of these gray shaded lines is a recession. And it right before or right at the beginning of each of these gray shaded areas, the recession was preceded by 2 consecutive quarters of GDP contraction. In other words, the gross domestic product was negative. And so we know that we are in a recession, technically, if not by the definition by the federal government currently, which is fine. I'm not here to talk politics. I'm just here to analyze the data and present it to you. Now, another predictor of a recession is the unemployment rate. Ironically, every recession, so this blue line that you see is the unemployment rate. And if you'll notice, every recession is preceded by a dip, a lull, a low in the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate is a great predictor also of a recession. The irony is that as unemployment goes down, it leads into a recession for a variety of reasons that we won't get into this video, but history doesn't lie. Again, all of this information is publicly available, and you can go to this site right here, fred.stlouisfed.org, and you can get all this information for yourself. So that is an important preface to the rest of what I'm going to say, because we are in a recession and we're probably about 1/3 to a little over a quarter of the way through. And as things go on, as the Fed continues to aggressively raise rates to combat inflation, we're going to see a turn in that. And hopefully we'll start to see that in October. So what's next? The other important thing that I want people to really understand is that just because there's a recession doesn't mean that home prices go down. They don't. In fact, of the last 6 recessions, only 2 of them did home prices decline. The other 4, houses actually continued to appreciate. Now, the Great Recession of 2008 happened, and that happened for all sorts of reasons having to do with fraud and all sorts of other terrible things that never should have gone on. And they've overhauled the mortgage industry and real estate. And so that will never happen again. That's why we're not in a bubble. People keep saying, I'm waiting for the bubble to burst. There's no bubble, because all the appreciation these days is truly driven by demand. So, like I said, in 1991, that recession, housing prices dipped a little bit, but in the other 4, houses continue to appreciate at a very good pace. So keep that in mind as I go through some of these next things. So where are houses headed, right? Where are home values, I should say, headed? If we look again at history, you can see with this green line all the way back starting in 2013, there is a steady line of appreciation. Then, of course, right towards the end of 2020, the big acceleration happened, and we saw home prices going up 18.9% in the Salt Lake area. Now, and it's not just Zillow, but it's Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the MBA, the NAR. All of these agencies are predicting that homes are going to continue to appreciate. They're just going to continue to appreciate at a slower pace. So, and that is the really important distinction that people need to make. There is a difference between appreciation at a slower rate and depreciation of homes. Those are not the same thing. Think of it like this. You're driving down the freeway at 100 miles an hour. You take the foot off the gas some and slow to about 60 miles an hour. You're not going backwards. You're still going forward. You're just not going forward as fast as you were before. So this slide right here shows 2 important indicators: the HPI, or Housing Pricing Index, which is put out by the FHFA. It's a government agency, and also the Case-Shiller Index. Case-Shiller is a private company that tracks home values and is considered the gold standard in the industry. And the reason that these are both here side by side is because what the point is for you to see the FHFA House Price Index and Case-Shiller agree with one another. So the big thing to see is that right here at 0%, okay, Everything above this line is appreciation. And then right here, below the line, this is depreciation. In other words, wherever there's indicators above this line, that means that home prices went up. Whenever there's indicators below this line, this means home prices went down. And you can see starting in 2008, right when the big crash happened, this is why in this great recession right here, a lot of value was lost. But that was a correction that was very much needed. Then right after about 2012, things started to pick up, and houses have continued to appreciate in varying degrees until, of course, the latter part of 2020 and beginning of 2021, when things just took off like crazy. And many would argue, myself included, that it was an over appreciation. Now, what we're going to see moving forward is a correction to this over appreciation. We're not going to see a decline in values, but we're going to see a decline at the rate of appreciation. And that makes for a healthy market. That's what's needed, because appreciation was outpacing people's income and was starting to price people out of the housing market. So this will allow people's incomes to catch up with the appreciation rate and get more people into homes. It will also allow sellers to sell more homes, because it doesn't matter if there's how many houses there are on the market to sell. If you don't have a buyer for it, you're stuck, right? So you can see that both the FHFA and Case-Shiller agree that we're going to see a drop in the appreciation rate, but we're still going to appreciate somewhere between 3 and 4% nationally, which is a good, healthy pace. Okay, so where does that take us? Well, we know that we're in a recession. Even if not from the data, everybody can feel it, right? We know we're in a recession. And historically speaking, home prices are not going to go down. They're just not going to appreciate as quickly, which is actually a good thing. But what about interest rates? Where are mortgage rates at? It seems like there's going to keep going up. Well, I shared with you at the very beginning that as inflation continues to be handled by the Federal Reserve, the interest rates should turn around and come down, probably starting in October, November of this year. How fast they come down will depend on how well inflation is being handled. Now, this next chart that I want to show you is interest rates laid on top of the last 7 recessions. So you can see that without exception, each one of these arrows shows the end of the recession for that time period. So out of the last 7 recessions, in each and every case, interest rates took a dive. So 30-year, 15-year, I could have put up a whole bunch of ones here, but it's the same across the board. Without exception, towards the end or at the end of every recession, the interest rates fell. And in many cases, actually in most cases, they continue to fall for a protracted period of time. So what do we know? We know we're in a recession. We know that the Federal Reserve is combating it. We know that inflation hit some of its highest points in October, November, December, and then into the beginning part of this year. And so that as the Federal Reserve continues to combat inflation, that the recession will wind down, come to an end, and we'll see interest rates, mortgage interest rates come back down, right? So all of that is based off of historical data and analysis and looking at what has happened in the past, because history is the greatest indicator of what the future holds for us. So what does all this mean? Well, should you buy a house now or should you wait for rates to come down? So here's the thing. Since right now there's a lot of inventory on the market and sellers are much more willing to negotiate, and once again, there are actually deals on the market. Since we know the homes are going to continue to appreciate and that rates are going to come down, it's far better to buy a house now when you can get a deal, so to speak, or at a good value. And you'll get a higher rate right now, knowing that not too long from now, you'll be able to refinance into a much lower rate. As we like to say in the mortgage industry, marry the house and date the rate, because you only get to buy the house once. Once you've bought the house, you've bought the house. You can't buy the house again, right? So whatever price you pay for that house is the price that you bought that house at. However, your mortgage rate is not the same thing. you may get a 6% interest rate right now, and next year end up with a 4.5%. So keep that in mind. But the big news is that there is an end in sight. Things are going to get better. Values are not going to fall. They're just going to appreciate at a slower pace, which is a good thing. And mortgage rates will be coming down probably towards the very end part of this year, the beginning of next year, and we should see that continue all throughout next year. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm more than happy to take your call. And you can also click the video and email me any questions if you'd like to chat. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.